And thank you for attending our virtual discussion, Thornton. My name is Elisabeth Angele. I am responsible for information and patron services at the Hamden Public Library. Many thanks, special thanks to Christine Witten, Hamden resident and Hamden business, who helped organize this panel discussion with the Hamden Public Library in connection with Thornton Wilder's birthday on April 17, and in conjunction with the Thornton Wilder Writing Competition Award ceremony on April 22nd in Thornton Wilder Hall here in Hamden. Thornton Wilder, 1897 to 1965, a longtime resident of Hamden, was a titan of 20th the novel The Bridge of San Luis Rey, 1928, and the two plays Our Town, 1938, and The Skin of Our Teeth, 1943. He is the only writer ever to be honored with Pulitzer Prizes in both fiction and drama. His most famous play, Our Town, has been called the finest American play ever written by fellow playwright Edward Albee. He was a masterful storyteller whose innovative and timeless work still resonates around the world 50 years after his death. Before I introduce you to our moderator and panelists, I would like to do some Zoom keeping. Please note that we are recording this program to the Zoom cloud and then upload it to the library's YouTube channel. I will send out a follow-up email with the Zoom recording link. To achieve the best sound quality, everybody should be muted. When you want to participate in the discussion, please unmute yourself. There are ways to do that. On the microphone icon on the left-hand side of the Zoom toolbar, simply click on that or hold down the spacebar on your computer or hold the Alt key and the letter A. Once you have finished sharing your thoughts, please mute yourself again. It is now my great pleasure to introduce our presenters this evening. Our moderator is Ray Andrewsen. Mr. Andrewsen has enjoyed a lengthy career in radio broadcasting. He was general manager and morning show host of Quinnipiac University's WQUN for over 22 years. WQUN was voted the New Haven area's best radio station. He received many awards, among them the Arnold Dean Award for Connecticut Broadcasting. He was the executive director of the Quinnipiac Chamber of Commerce and formerly director of membership services for the Greater New Haven Chamber of Commerce. Welcome and thank you, Mr. Andrewsen. And now I would like to introduce our panelists. Jackson R. Bryer is Professor Emeritus of English at the University of Maryland, where he taught undergraduate and graduate courses for 41 years. He is the editor or co-editor of more than 25 books on American playwrights. He was a member of the board of the Penn Faulkner Foundation for 30 years and serves as president of the Thornton Wilder Society and of the F. Scott Fitzgerald Society. Editor of Conversations with Thornton Wilder, 1992, and co-editor of the Selected Letters of Thornton Wilder, 2008. Welcome and thank you, Professor Bryer. Marydell Merrill is the director of the Hamden High School Mainstage Ensemble. As an actor, she has performed with several Connecticut companies, including Longworth Theater and Connecticut Free Shakespeare. As a workshop presenter, she has presented at the Yale Repertory Theater, Willpower Teacher Workshops, as a master teaching artist for breakdancing Shakespeare at Hartford Stage, and at several educational theater festivals at the state, regional, and national level, including the International Thespian Festival. Ms. Merrill was the recipient of the 2014 Inspirational Theater Educator Award from the International Thespian Society and the Hall of Fame Award from the Northeast Educational Theater Festival. Welcome and thank you, Marydell Merrill. Walton Wilson is the professor in the practice of acting at the Geffen School of Drama at Yale University. He has served as voice, text, and dialect coach for productions on Broadway, off-Broadway, and in regional theater, including a multitude of new plays and adaptations by American and international theater makers. He has held faculty appointments at NYU Tisch School of the Arts, Fordham College at Lincoln Center, Emerson College, and Southern Methodist University, and has been an artist in residence at various theaters in the US and abroad. His professional acting credits include productions of Broadway and in regional theaters and Shakespeare festivals across the United States. Welcome and thank you, Professor Wilson. And now I will pass on the microphone to our moderator, Ray Andrewsen. Let the discussion begin.
Elizabeth, thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. Welcome. We look forward to a good conversation here this evening. And of course, this is being recorded, so do feel free to encourage people to log into the Hamden Library site to be able to view this or to share with your friends the link to this discussion tonight. We had a wonderful discussion, as Elizabeth had mentioned, last year. And that discussion took us across the life of Thornton Wilder, but also to the stage and to his impact. And tonight we'll talk about the themes, his writings, with all of the panelists who are with us here tonight. So you heard the ground rules about how you can engage later on. At the conclusion of our discussion, give us about a half hour, 45 minutes to get into the meat of the discussion here tonight with our panel of experts, and then we welcome your questions in on the back end of that. So without further ado, well, let's talk about Thornton Wilder, the man. And those of you who live in the Hamden area, on Deepwood Drive, there is a house. That was the Thornton Wilder property on Deepwood Drive, down near Lake Whitney. That's where he lived for many, many years. He's also buried in Mount Carmel Cemetery along Route 10 in Hamden. So there's a huge connection to this American literary icon right here in our community. And last year it was my privilege to talk with Professor Jackson Bryer, who heads up a lot of the organizations and the research into the life and to the works of Thornton Wilder. And Jackson, I'd like to just start with you if you can unmute and just tell a little bit about the man. If Thornton Wilder is joining us here tonight, give us an idea of his personality, his biography, what made him go, his educational background, and sort of take us to the narrative from the 20s, 30s, 40s, on to his death in the 70s. That's a lot of years to cover in the first answer, isn't it?
What an easy assignment, Ray. Thank you so much. Well, the one while Thornton Wilder is known primarily for our town and perhaps the bridge at San Luis Rey, which was in Hamden that he lived in, which he also was extremely active in a number of other forms of writing. Uh, the Bridge of San Luis Rey is one of 7 novels he wrote in his lifetime, each of them very different from the others. And perhaps we can talk a little bit about them later. He wrote, as some of you know, he wrote the screenplay for a movie that Alfred Hitchcock directed called Shadow of a Doubt, which is ordinarily regarded as one of Hitchcock's greatest movies. He wrote essays. He had an extensive career as a lecturer around the country in the 20s, and many of those lectures became essays that he published in the early, I think in the early 50s, it was that he gave the Norton lectures at Harvard, and those lectures have been collected along with many of his other essays in a book called American Characteristics. He wrote the librettos for 2 operas that were adapted from his work, one by the Long Christmas Dinner, adapted by Paul Hindemith from his one-act play, and another full-length opera adapted from perhaps his least well-known play, The Alcestiad, with the musical score by a woman named Louise Talma. He was fluent in at least 4 languages, and he did and published and had produced translations of plays by Ibsen. His translation of A Doll's House with Ruth Gordon starring was for many years the longest running production of A Doll's House on Broadway. He also translated plays by Sartre and the French playwright Andre Aubé. So he was an extraordinarily gifted and versatile person and writer, much more than just the author of our town. Why don't we start there, Ray, and let other people get in on the conversation?
Absolutely. I think I'm glad you mentioned Our Town. That seems to be the iconic play. High schools and other theater companies, community theater companies all across the United States are still performing Our Town. So in that spirit, I'd like to welcome in from Yale, Professor Walton Wilson. And Walton, I'd like to ask you this question and follow up from with Marydell also. About the impact of Thornton Wilder today compared to what Jackson Bryer just mentioned from his lineage, his years, his productivity. How relevant is he today? Let's talk about him, if we can, Walton, from a perspective from 2025. And unmute your microphone and give us a little bit of insight about what it was like 100 years ago and fast forward 100 years ago today.
Right. Well, I think he was Thornton Wilder was such an innovator in American theater. I mean, he was heavily influenced, I think, by particular European playwrights such as Bertolt Brecht and Luigi Pirandello. And it's interesting, Wilder considered himself not an innovator, but as he called it, a rediscoverer of forgotten goods and a remover of offensive bric-a-brac into theater. So it's, and he was he was coming up against, at least in the American tradition, what we think of as realism or naturalism or poetic realism. And he was really trying to capture not verisimilitude, but reality. And his work was often, at least in our town, right, so focused on the most common, trivial relationships, and giving the impression of, I said that these common everyday occurrences were the most profound experiences of our life. So, and it's always a delight. I mean, our town, yes, is produced by all sorts of theater groups, community groups, colleges, universities, professionally, obviously. And there's something about it, about that story, that I think seems to speak to us as Americans, like from generation to generation. I think every generation, with great works, finds its own way in. But in all the productions that I've ever seen in that play, and I've seen, quite a few, one of the more remarkable things, to my mind, is that there is an absence of cynicism, and an absence of I don't know how to put it, but it's in a successful production, I think people are the characters are so close to the surface, right? So close to the skin. And the character is who they say they are, I think. This is not easy to do. This is not easy to do a lot for contemporary actors who are used to playing a lot of subtext, right? So I think it's a profoundly taking us from birth to marriage to death in the third act, and it's both very, very particular and almost universal its themes. So I'm a huge fan of the play, and would love to. I was in it decades ago, one time, and would love to do it. Would love to do it again at some point. So, any
Very
theatrical
accessible
producers
characters
out there?
Yeah.
Completely.
So if they're very accessible characters from century ago, almost really, or many decades ago, Marydell, I want to talk about high school students today who are going to put down their phone now while they're listening, because we're off social media while we have this conversation. And if you can unmute your microphone and just sort of pick up what Walton and Jackson were just saying about our town and the plays, and how do the themes of transparent, easy to access characters, easy storylines, identifiable characters relate to students at Hamden High School? How do they access the works so easily?
Well, it was quite a journey. We just produced it at the high school in the fall of 21. And, there's a lot of exploration of older texts, modernizing them for a new generation. And a lot of the work that I do with the kids is trying to keep things closer to their original rendition, so that kids can learn about how similar we are to through time. People haven't really changed all that much. We have technology now, but people are very much the same. And As to the cell phone issue, I have in my classroom phone jail, and so when kids come in for rehearsal, their phones go in a little pocket, and they're not allowed to touch it. And we did a lot of things. You know, I think one of the scariest things for my students was the no props and the no, like, you know, we had kitchen tables in each of the environments, not much more than that. And so I think the pantomiming was really difficult. I have this amazing props master, Dave Valley, who culled all the props as if we were going to use them. And we used them for several weeks and let the kids get accustomed to them. But the kids were so, I can't even tell you how excited they were about all of it. This one ninth grade girl played Howie Newsome, and she was struggling to kind of figure out how to move across the stage with a horse and all of that. And I said, well, have you ever even been near a horse? And she's like, no. I said, well, there's a lot of horse farms around here. And she did. She went and she found a place where they would let her learn how to walk around with a horse. And they were so invested to that level. I thought that it was marvelous. And they were so genuine. I think one of the things, this was the first production we put on where we could share it with an audience after we were all sent home in the spring of 2020. And when I selected the play, it was picking our town for our town. And it was the initiation of this wonderful relationship that the theater department now has with Hamden Public Library. And we did a whole marketing thing with the marketing students, and people from all over Hamden sent us pictures of what Hamden means to them. And we were able to, the media students made posters using all the pictures. And so we had this beautiful visual display, and the kids were part of all of that. So I think that the warmth of, you know, and the humanity of it, kids understand that. They do understand.
Yeah. One thing too is if you are a teacher, Thornton Wilder also wished to be a teacher, began his career as a teacher. So the influence of a teacher, I gather, in connecting with students, I gather he taught French for a while to boys at Lawrenceville School in New Jersey. And he was a lecturer, so he was very much seen with students. So I guess having a teacher like you teach what a teacher taught us decades ago, reflect on that, because there must be some special insight a teacher has into a community as well. Clearly, somebody who would study characters and develop characters as plainly and cleanly as he did understood human nature. You have to have the same approach to your work as a teacher.
I've been teaching full-time in public schools. This is year 21 now. I was working as an artist in residence in New Haven for several years before I became a classroom teacher, I guess is how you'd say it. But I guess I really try to create a safe space in my classroom, and I encourage students to listen to each other and listen to the room. I watched this morning your discussion from last year, and one of the things that you all talked about was Simon Stimson and how he's kind of an outcast, and kids really gravitate towards that idea in the play when we worked on it. And I work very hard on building community within the group, and kindness and generosity. And I think that that's kind of I'm guessing Walton has it in a very different way at a different university level, but with high school, you know, they're coming straight from middle school, and middle schoolers are tough. Our ninth graders this year are tough, and trying to get them to kind of calm down and be present and be kind and to listen.
Important.
Yes.
Very important. So I want to pick up what you just said and ask the two professors. And I'll start with Walton. I'll go back to you, Jackson, if I might. Walton, it is, as Marydell just mentioned, high school students. Now we go to college age, and Thornton Wilder seemed to have loneliness seemed to drag him, sort of an empathetic sense of those who are isolated, lonely. He didn't marry, carried his family, sort of like the breadwinner for his family. Questions of sexual confusion. So that's sort of on the outside. How do you think that influenced his work, his personal life, and identifying with lonely characters? So unmute and tell us what you think.
Well, first of all, Marydell, I just want to say that a lot of the issues that you're dealing with in your classroom, I deal with the same things. I do. It's the same story, just different kind of heightened something, but it's the same thing. That's a great question, Ray. And I think that the cliche of writers is that they're sort of working alone in a room, you know, and with their imagination, and you know, emerge sometime later with a you know, like Athena coming from Zeus's head, you know, like a fully formed manuscript. And I think you know, like reading Our Town, there's not one character in that story that I can think of. There's not one character that as an audience member I couldn't attach to in some way. You know, I think every member of that story, every character in the story, some persons in the audience can attach to them, whether it's that person's telling my life story, or I can empathize with the, you know, like with the Stimson character. There's a sort of transparency about who these people are, that I think invites empathy. You know, it just invites empathy, the way that he writes. And we're all confused animals spinning on a planet in the middle of space, you know. So I think his latitude for humanity, in other words, his ability to see so many different kinds of people, perhaps is a reflection, or in some way, related to his own identity, I would think.
Yeah, so he sort of internalized it, externalized it through his characters, and made them very transparent, very approachable, very identifiable. And thank you, Walton. I want to just ask Jackson about that too, because all of his writings, individuality, loneliness, isolation, I think even Vivek Murthy, the Surgeon General, wrote a book on loneliness recently. Thought of it as a public ill. We know that we're bowling alone more often these days. So we're living in that era. So maybe, Jackson, if you can reflect on all of the body of work from Thornton Wilder, that if you took it from that era, an earlier era, it really has contemporary relevance today. Discuss those themes if you can.
Well, some of the things that Marydell and Walton talked about, Wilder in his youth, when he was in college, probably saw more theater than most of us see in a lifetime. He was a reviewer at a very early age for a Boston newspaper. As Walton mentioned, he became familiar with the works that were changing the nature of modern drama by people like Pirandello and Brecht. But he became very dissatisfied with them. And in a very famous essay, he made the remark that the food on the tables was real, but the emotions weren't. And he determined that he would write plays in which the food on the table didn't have to be real. They didn't have to be sets, as Marydell mentioned and as Walton mentioned, but the emotions were real. And that's what makes his plays and his novels, by the way, timeless, because while they are often located in the novels, particularly in exotic places, Bridge of San Luis Rey takes place in Peru of long ago, a country Wilder never even visited. He has a novel called The
So Jackson, I'm gonna say you're breaking up a little bit in your location.
Exotic novel.
So I think we'll go back to you and we'll ask that question again in just a moment while we can regain a little better audio
Or exotic locale.
So what I'd like to do too,
metaphors for.
Yep. What I'd like to do is swing back if I can, Jackson. Just mute if you can and you get this because you're breaking up a little bit. I'd like to go back to Walton and Marydell for just a second too and talk about and sort of expand upon what you were discussing. It's interesting. He had a brother who went to Harvard, I guess, to Harvard Divinity School. And Walton, I guess, in terms of religion, he just saw religion as doesn't explain much. So expand on that a little bit, where he saw maybe religion wasn't as didn't really fill his cup in terms of explaining the human condition as well.
That might be so. I mean, I'm thinking of Skin of Our Teeth, right? And how sort of the four principal characters in that show, in that play are, well, they're archetypes, right? But each of those come from the Bible, right? Like is a version of Adam. Thus is a version of Sabas and the Henry is Cain, so you can read. I think he drew from stories from Christianity anyway. But yeah, he didn't seem to have much truck with I'm gonna say morality, with at least with Western or Christian morality. I think by nature as a writer, he was probably a moralist, but he fought against that, I think he fought against the impulse that this play has this particular message.
Yeah.
I think the story is the story, and what you get from it is what you get from it, which is unlike a lot of the theater that I think he was reacting against.
Yeah. So not trying to seek the moral high ground.
Right.
Yeah. So Marydell, I'm curious what other themes you think about in his plays, and how he didn't marry, but I was curious about women, and Gertrude Stein, who's a very close friend, Alice B. Toklas, we mentioned Jean-Paul Sartre and others. He liked strong personalities.
Well, one of the things that was great for me that I sort of came across in trying to get myself ready to talk about this was in this wonderful book that I have. It's the collection of the short plays. And I'd had it on my shelf and never really looked at it before, but in it that talks about his friendship with Gertrude Stein and her basically gave him the intellectual validation and courage to go on and write such a seemingly homespun work as Our Town. And I think that it's a fascinating idea that this woman who seemed to me forward-thinking and into art and culture and music, that she felt that was a great idea and celebrated it. And I wonder too if they were good friends and she trusted the celebration of his voice. I don't know. But also one of the things that I discovered was I had never read the Seven Deadly Sins plays. And so I am not an expert in them in any way, shape, or form. But one of the things that struck me is a point you brought up a moment ago about loneliness. And when I read all of them, it struck me that all of the characters are lonely. All of them are in some way. And I feel like, he writes a lot about, in a lot of things, he touches on the life and death issue. And, we're born alone and we die alone. And whether we're introverted or what, we're striving awkwardly or graciously trying to make human connections along the way. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And I think that it doesn't really answer your question about strong women, but the women.
Strong personalities.
Yes, they are strong personalities. They're strong in this one play. Which one is it? It's the one on, well, they're all strong. Even in all of these ones that I just read, in Bernice, she's strong. In the one on the woman, I can't remember all of them. The daughter, or the niece in the one where they're in the restaurant and she's going to get married to this young man. All of the women stand up for themselves.
Yeah.
All of them voice what they need. And I think one of the things that I loved about working on that play with Our Town, with the kids, was that a lot of those scenes, the scene with the father and son, they are so painful. I think it's Emily's father and George. That scene is so awkward. It is so painfully awkward and perfect, But the women, they just have their talk. They don't mess about or hopscotch about. They just kind of say what it is. And I think that is true. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. I've always, in getting to know people who've been on stage, and Walton, I'm going to address this question to you, in terms of just the techniques of his writing, but also the techniques of the stage. So you like to act. We seem to, obviously in this era of social media, like to project our feelings outward rather than someone sitting next to us or across the table enjoying a cappuccino or lunch. It's sort of our culture now. It's a projection, and that's what the stage is. We sit, we watch passively with actors, and we identify with those characters sort of in a triangular way from our seats. So let's talk about the fourth wall and some of these other techniques that he used in his writing and his acting capacity, Walton, and how he used techniques to engage us and sort of draw us in as readers and draw us in as people who were audience participants, if you will.
Yeah, thank you. I think, he was, despite his own kind of self-effacement effacement. He was quite an innovator for the American stage. And people put different levels to, there was a lot of direct address to the audience, right? As in Shakespeare's day. But that particular mode of theater in this country had been out of fashion for several hundred years, and it sort of brings back this direct talking to the audience. And I think when theater is working, right? I mean, when a play is working, and Marydell, you can, I'm sure, speak to this. There is the audience really isn't passive. They're actually giving quite a lot of energy, and it doesn't need to be vocal necessarily. But it's something that as an actor, you're very aware of. It's almost like a bioelectric current between the actor and the audience. And how do I say this? In our town, it feels like as an actor, you're pulling the audience into the story rather than pushing energy out to the audience. You're inviting the audience into these moments of seemingly, inconsequential moments of life. And then in a story like, in a different play, right, in Skin of Our Teeth, it's very spectacle. There's a lot of spectacle. There's a lot of presentation in that play. So he was so adept as a writer to be able to master kind of two very different genres of theater. And I think it does the actor. It's a slightly different job the actor has in both of those shows. Maybe not the what so much as the how.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, the techniques and drawing us all in, because if something is in perpetuity of 80, 90 years of performance, obviously it draws us in. So the techniques are working. I want to go back to you, Jackson, if we can, and just talk about, from an historical perspective, where he was found, where we find Thornton Wilder, in terms of the emergence of television in the late 40s and 50s, not just on stage, not just what we do with, we go to the Thornton Wilder library and take out a book, and we take one of his plays and go home and reread. But what's it like to be on television in the 50s? There were all sorts of plays and dramas that were presented on sort of the infancy of network television. So talk about how he was accessed over time, if you can.
You ask such tough questions, Ray. I grew up in the 50s, so I should be able to answer that question very easily. When I was in high school, the Bridge of San Luis Rey was required reading. And I read it in high school and never got over it. And in some ways, the reason I have done so much work on Wilder is just because of that. Now, frequently read in high school now is a very famous TV musical adaptation of Our Town, starring Frank Sinatra as the stage managing, and from which the song Love and Marriage, which some of you may recognize, became a very popular song. And I remember in the mid-1950s going to see a revival of The Skin of Our Teeth with Mary Martin as Sabina, Helen Hayes as Mrs. Antrobus. It was taken to Paris as the American entrant in an artistic extravaganza. So Wilder it has always been there. Certainly, Our Town has been there from the day it was first produced down to today. The cliche is it's done every night of the year, someplace in the world, and probably several places in the world.
Yeah.
I happen to know, and I don't think this is letting on something I shouldn't let on, that there is the possibility of a musical based on Skin of Our Teeth, which might very well be done in New York next year. There's an opera version of Our Town that was done in opera houses around the world and is still being done. So Wilder's always been there. I think, speaking as a university academic in retirement, but who certainly had lots of experience in university teaching, that he's probably not held in as high repute among teachers of modern literature, particularly fiction, as he was in his lifetime. I think he was a more well-known American writer during the 20s, 30s, and 40s, and perhaps even into the 50s.
Yeah. Well, if we, and by the way, the reason I ask these tough questions, Jackson, is I'm asking these questions of two professors and a high school teacher, and this is called revenge. So I'm a student here of what you know, but let's follow up with Skin of Our Teeth if I can. And Jackson, I want to go right back actually to you, and I want to ask this also Walton and Marydell. It started here in New Haven, just like Oklahoma, and theater in New Haven is so bold. He could get in his Packard or whatever he was driving in the 40s when this was put out in 1942. And just drive down Whitney Avenue, go to the Schubert, or go to a theater in New Haven. But he didn't like so much at that time. I guess he thought that theater was lagging compared to the other arts. So what did he mean by that, Jackson, back in the 40s when he put Skin of Our Teeth out? I mean, here he is spoofing contemporary life at that time. What did he mean about the theater not being the best vehicle?
Well, because it harks back to what I said earlier. Skin of Our Teeth is the perfect example of what I talked about earlier, in that it takes place on two levels simultaneously. The Antrobus family is a suburban New Jersey family, but they are also Adam and Eve. They have a son named Henry who killed his twin brother with a slingshot. Well, he's obviously Cain and Abel. And what Wilder is trying to do in that play, which on the surface is what he called Hell's a Poppin' on Broadway, where anything is possible and where all sorts of incredible things happen, is to make you aware that as far as we get away from classical sources, from ancient Rome or wherever he wants to set his novel or his play, there are things that are universal that transcend time. And as I say, he was very, very contemptuous of realistic modern theater, the kind of thing that Walton was talking about that was very popular in the 30s. He has a very famous statement where he said, "I'm not interested in the eccentricities of dentists because," and he was talking about a Clifford Odets play that was a very realistic portrayal of a dentist who was having all sorts of trials and tribulations. And Wilder wasn't interested in that. He was interested in transcending the realistic and sometimes going to the absolute absurdist end in order to bring our attention paradoxically back to today. But I'm sure Walton has more interesting things to say about that than I do.
Walton, do you have interesting things to say to sort of pick up on that? Because student of theater and educating young minds who are enduring into that. The 30s theater to today. Today, we're in a different era. So anything that related to that era, do you have any insight on what Wilder felt at that time?
Well, I was thinking just to piggyback on something that Jackson just said about the more realistic the setting is, the more confined in time it is, right? The more sort of narrowed the scope is. And so when you have like three chairs and you're miming these or you know these different behaviors, it kind of opens the imagination up in a way that makes these that makes the timelessness of the event, as well as you're watching very specific people on stage. So it's very specific to these characters on stage, but it's as Jackson said, it's sort of it's a very expansive sort of technique. And I was also thinking in Skin of Our Teeth, that I was thinking of the relationship of Pirandello, right? You have like Sabina and Henry, these two characters, they make us aware that they are performing, right? That they are in the theater, and that their parts that they have been assigned are not entirely to their liking. And they want to try to convey something about themselves that perhaps the theater doesn't have the means to express. But I think I love those moments in the play where in that play particularly where the character kind of steps out of the action and they talk to us and go, this is you know, this is a terrible play. I don't understand a word of it. And then she goes back in to it. So yeah, there's something about the circular and repetitive nature of experience that I think is touches a bit on what Jackson was actually very eloquently talking about.
Yeah, so it's sort of like the Howard Thurman quote, the theologian, you know, it's the wisdom of today is minute compared to the wisdom of life, the ages. So we're going back in circles again. So Marydell, you're teaching a lot younger people even than Walton is engaged in, or Professor Bryer, Jackson had in his classes. So when you're talking with high school students, they haven't seen as much of the world quite yet. So how do they interpret these themes that Walton just talked about from, you know, spoof of modern times? Today would be The Onion, or it'd be Saturday Night Live, or some other forms of satire. What do they think about? Do they connect with the satire from that era?
You know, it's kind of interesting to me all the time to realize on a daily basis how much they don't know and how much you have to give them examples and connect things. And one of the things that I work hard on is showing them that everything's connected and how they can relate what they're talking about, you know, to what they're doing, and try to have it make sense. It's important to me that they understand what they're trying to do at every second. So, because otherwise it's clear to me, it becomes a play about a kid who doesn't know what they're doing. So I try really hard to make sure they're all centered and clear the whole way through, which means we have a lot of conversations. And I will tell you that as a 10th grader, playing Gladys in Skin of Our Teeth, I had no idea what the heck was going on in that play. I remember enjoying the experience of it so very much, but like, what on earth is this play about? Like,
Yeah.
I know that I wasn't sure. I wasn't, but it was fun. And, you know, one of the things that I've learned about, if you create an environment where the kids are all in it together, then they listen to the play. They will stand in the wings just to listen to the play. And the more they hear it and the more they're engaged in their characters and the storytelling, I think the more they understand what they're trying to say, what those life moments are about, whether they're genuine and realistic or absurd. I mean, but really, they start not really knowing anything every time.
Yeah. Interesting. So yeah, and it's a little bit difficult to make that connection, as Walton had just indicated, from an earlier era to today, and that's sort of your role, is to sort of bring on these themes. The characters are transparent. We were lonely in 1930 as much as we were lonely in the year 2030 coming up, 100 years later. So this is a part of the program where we welcome you to raise your hand if you're in the audience. As we heard at the beginning of this program, if you have a question, you have a couple of options. You can put it in the chat if you want to tap for our panelists to a specific panelist you'd like to address, or if you'd like to address all three panelists to answer your question. If you have any questions to follow up about Thornton Wilder, and at the conclusion of our gathering today, we'll also provide you some information on what's going on later this week and later this month at the Thornton Wilder Library here in Hamden. So if you have any questions, we welcome you to start engaging with that. In the meantime, I'll stay with you, Marydell, and I want to go back to Walton and Jackson. And this is another, I'm sorry, Jackson, a little bit of an esoteric sort of generalized question, but it's been on my mind of historical figures. If you could bring back Abraham Lincoln and walk the streets of New Haven, what would you show Abraham Lincoln? If you could bring Dr. Martin Luther King back and walk him around and show him the contemporary United States, and there's so many figures in history. If you were to take Thornton Wilder through New Haven with the Yale Rep, Long Wharf Theater in the community, all of the other theater groups that are around, and take them to these performances, what would you like to hear from him? What questions would you would like to ask Thornton Wilder yourself? And Marydell, I'll start with you, and I'll go back to Walton and then to Jackson. You have an evening out on the town here in New Haven with Thornton Wilder.
Wow, that's amazing. So I think one of the most awesome plays that I saw recently in New Haven was actually Long Wharf Theater doing A View from the Bridge at the Canal Dockhouse. And I just thought that that was so rich and so atmospheric and so, I don't know, it just was one of the most marvelous recent experiences I've had. And I would want to talk to him about atmosphere and understanding the characters and the tone, and because it's all in his work. He's like a master. It's interesting listening to or reading about how much revision he did and saving pages and going back to pages, and yet his work doesn't read as being fussy and overworked. And he creates such rich atmosphere in those moments, like Walt said about, how big Skin of Our Teeth is and how quiet and warm sort of Our Town is. These different scope. He's so good at it. I would want to sit with him and have him watch A View from the Bridge and talk about atmosphere and talk about how he approaches that.
Wow, that's remarkable, and that's an interesting place, a great venue for a play that we hadn't anticipated, right on literally on the waterfront. It's almost as if Marlon Brando are around the corner too, to be down at the boathouse. So Walton, I want to ask you too. I mean, you're out on the town. You have an evening with Thornton Wilder, and you're discussing what's out in terms of some of the theater groups, some of the plays that have been out in the seasons that we have recently. What kind of questions would you ask him over dinner?
Well, boy, I love that question. Marydell, that was a brilliant production, The View from the Bridge. That was a wonderful, wonderful production. There was a play that we just concluded at Yale Rep called The Inspector, which was an adaptation of Gogol's story, the Inspector General. And as Wilder was, Jackson, I don't know, he was a translator himself, is that right? And an adapter. And I would be really curious about his, because I'm sure he knew the story. I would be very curious to see what his thoughts were about this particular adaptation, what worked, what didn't work, and yeah, I would be really interested in talking to him about adapting from sources, particularly outside your language, that come from another language, and what the many challenges are in terms of translating and adapting.
So Jackson, in your longtime role at University of Maryland, English professor, but also president of the Thornton Wilder Society. I'm sure you've, in your mind, thought about many occasions when you'd have dinner with Thornton Wilder. So tell us what you would like to ask him.
Well, one thing about Wilder is he's the most difficult to pin down human being of almost any writer I know. We talk about his loneliness. He has an essay called The American Loneliness, which is directly on that topic. Certainly, there are lonely characters in his plays. And yet, on the other hand, he was one of the most social human beings you can possibly imagine. He loved people. He loved going to a bar in downtown New Haven of an evening and sitting at a table and having Yale undergraduates and faculty show up and talk to him. He made friends wherever he went. He was close to Gertrude Stein. He was as close to Gertrude Stein as he was to Gene Tunney, if you know who Gene Tunney was. He had friends from all walks of life. At one point in his life, he got in his car and drove as far west as he could go before the car broke down. It broke down outside a town called Douglas, Arizona, where he didn't know a soul, and he spent a year there. On the other hand, the day before he got in that car, he'd been at the White House at a reception for the literary elites of the time, and he was comfortable in both worlds. What I would have done if I had Wilder with me, and this is perverse and probably would have occurred to a lot of people, I would have liked to have taken him to Kenny Leon's most recent revival of Our Town, and which did some things with the play.
So we're losing your connection again, Jackson. So I'm going to come back to you in just a moment. We're welcoming your questions in the meantime from you in the chat. I'm going to go back, Walton, just to you for a second, and then Jackson, we'll try to reconnect with you. Walton, you talk about just Wilder's collaboration with others like in screenplay, like Alfred Hitchcock, for example. So Hitchcock is one of our questions, the collaboration between Wilder and Hitchcock.
I think this is a really interesting collaboration, because Hitchcock was not known as a collaborator. Hitchcock was, by all reports and whatever I've read, he sort of, I mean, he was a collaborator with, I can't remember the name of the composer, but in terms of writing material, he often wrote everything, wanted to do everything himself. So there must have been something attractive to him about Wilder and his writing. I don't know what that is, but I suspect that as we've been talking about, that Wilder had a sense of how to open a doorway into a character that is very doorway is, the portal is open. The portal is really clear. So that would be I think that would be a fascinating play to make. That would be a fascinating story to make.
Yeah. I'm glad that you mentioned a collaboration with Alfred Hitchcock. I couldn't imagine. And so we're going to try to establish contact again with Jackson Bryer and a couple of questions heading in his direction. We welcome you in the chat, or if you raise your hand, if you happen to have any questions you'd like us to address to our panelists here tonight. Marydell, I want to go in your direction if I can, and just talk about the geography here of Hamden, because students, of course, come to the high school or they come to the physical plant, but they don't understand sometimes what's around them. Do you think any of them really would like to, especially I hope not during a winter snowstorm, go up Deepwood Drive and see that house where he lived for so many years, or take him on a little trip to where he is buried, place a little wreath at the gravesite on Mount Carmel near Sleeping Giant and Sleeping Giant Golf Course? He is accessible. I mean, Thornton Wilder is a Hamdenite, is he not?
Yes, and I do think that there's at least a group of kids who would love that class, reading his works and going to his house and taking the tour and just kind of immersing, acting some of the plays out. I think it would be a wonderful class. I want to teach it.
Yeah.
But Hamden's really diverse. Hamden is a really long, and you've got one end that butts up against New Haven that is just in a whole different socioeconomic place than the side of town that's closer to Sleeping Giant and that Mount Carmel area. It's just very different. So I think some of the kids would be very, very curious. But I don't know. I don't know that all kids would be.
Yeah, that's
But
right.
there's definitely kids who would be. I have a lot of students. In fact, one of the winners of the Thornton Wilder competition wasn't my writing student, but he is one of our Mainstage kids. So he helped build the set for the last show, and he is a writer too. So I'm happy and excited for him. So I think there's definitely interest, and that would be a wonderful class, I think.
Absolutely. Well, we have Thornton Wilder omnipresent, the library, as we know. We also have it in our Hamden High School and our community groups, our theater groups all around here. Walt mentioned the Yale Rep, but also the Yale School of Drama, and of course with Jackson Bryer as head of the Thornton Wilder Society. People still are intrigued and are so very, very interested. So I think at this point, what we'll do is we want to thank our panelists, and I will in just a second. I'll turn it back to you, Elizabeth. So Marydell, I want to thank you very much for being a part of this panel here tonight. Marydell Merrill, director of the Hamden High School Mainstage Ensemble. Walton Wilson is professor in practice of acting at Yale University. We did lose, unfortunately, because of a bad connection. These things happen in our little town, our town. Dr. Jackson Bryer, the Professor Emeritus of English at the University of Maryland. Thank you all three for an excellent discussion tonight on our panel. And I turn it back to you, Elizabeth. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ray, Jackson, Walton, and Marydell for a wonderful discussion. And thank you also again to Christine for helping to bring you all together, and hopefully we can continue this. I just want to mention briefly that we have organized this panel discussion in connection with Thornton Wilder's birthday this Thursday, April 17, and also with the Thornton Wilder Writing Competition Award Ceremony, which will take place next Tuesday, April 22nd at 6:30 p.m. in Thornton Wilder Hall, which is in the same building complex as the Hamden Public Library. Also, at the end of April, on April 28th, we'll have a book discussion about Anne Patchett's novel, Tom Lake. And this is a book where somebody retells an experience with a summer production of our town. Anne Patchett received the Thornton Wilder Prize last fall in New York in connection with the Broadway production of Our Town that made quite some headlines. So Thornton Wilder is ever present and will continue to be so here in Hamden. And again, many thanks to you all for contributing to keeping him alive and keeping the discussion going. And thank you for our audience joining us this evening. We'll send out the Thornton, this recording from this panel discussion. It will be uploaded to the YouTube channel, and you can also see the panel discussion from last January on the library's YouTube channel, Hamden Public Library YouTube. Thank you all so much. Let's stop the recording.